Well, hello, and welcome to the opening edition of the Grow, Transform, and Evolve podcast, where we discuss all things personal and professional development. Hi, I'm Steve Gavatorta, your host, and I'm happy to be here. This podcast has been actually months in the making. A lot of obstacles were faced and overcome, thank goodness, and now we're ready to launch. And very excited about being able to do this podcast, the topic in general, which I think is greatly needed now with all the distractions, with all the insanity going on there. This podcast is about a dose of good news where we discuss all things, again, personal and professional development, but inspiration, motivation, great insights from really, really highly successful people. Before we begin today's episode, I want to touch three real important points before we start here. Number one, give you a little bit of a background about myself, your host, Steve Gavatorta. Secondly, get into the timeliness and the purpose of this podcast. Again, as I said earlier, I think this podcast and many like mine, I'm not the only one, is very much needed in these crazy, uncertain times. And then thirdly, get into a little bit of the format of the podcast. It's going to be primarily interview based, and I'll get into that a bit. And then we're going to spend the rest of the time with an interview of someone you may all know, Abraham Lincoln. This will be interesting. So hang in there. We'll get to that in a bit. But first about me. Again, my name is Steve Gavatorta. I'm actually owner and president of Steve Gavatorta Group. I've owned my business for about 17 years. And what I do is really focus on working with individuals, businesses, and entrepreneurs to help them accomplish their goals, whether it's growing their business, growing their profitability, market share, or whether it's individuals within the organization, providing them skills relevant to success, helping them accomplish their goals. What I do, I work closely with my clients to really, really discover their needs and issues they're facing, understand their industry and their business, and then I build custom-based solutions to meet those respective needs, whether it's workshop delivery, speaking, webinars, coaching, or some combination of those together. It all depends. Each client's different. And that's where I really get my kicks, is really, really working with my clients, learning their business, learning the things they're facing, and developing programs that help them themselves grow, transform, and evolve. Prior to owning this business, I spent over 20 years in corporate America in an array of roles, from sales, marketing, a liaison between sales and marketing, management, leadership, training, category management, loyalty, shopper marketing, really ran the gamut. So I carried the bag in a lot of different roles. So a lot of what you're going to learn from me is based off my 17 plus 20 years, 37, 38 years in the business, developing people. The second part of that is going to be the information you're going to learn from my guests, where I'm going to kick in next. The origin of this podcast, even before this whole crazy COVID dynamic came to fruition, I always said we are in a fast-paced, high-tech, ever-evolving world. Change is hitting us faster than ever. Adversity striking deeper. The need to make decisions is getting shorter and shorter. And this is the way of our world now, even before COVID. And I always stated that, without proper skills, knowledge, information, training, it's going to be very hard for us to not only survive these times, but to truly thrive in them. So the goal of this podcast is, I said, grow, transform, and evolve, where we discuss all things personal and professional development. It will be primarily interview format, where we're going to interview highly successful people, businessmen and women, entrepreneurs, marketing experts, sales experts, athletes, coaches, MMA fighters. It's going to really, yoga instructors, physicians. It's going to run the gamut. I have a bunch of wonderful people lined up that are willing to give their time and provide insights, motivation, inspiration, and skill sets, once again, to help you not only survive these crazy times, but thrive in them as well, too. I think the timeliness of this podcast with this whole COVID dynamic, too, is important, because I think people are seeking positivity. There's enough negative, crazy insanity going on in our world today. I want this to be a place people come to be inspired, motivated, and to learn valuable skills for them to succeed, whether it's, again, in a sales role, a marketing role, business role, or just facing life's obstacles or dealing more effectively with change. We'll cover different topics, different weeks, again, depending on who the guest is and what their expertise is. What their expertise is as well, too. Sorry about that. I choked a bit. So that's kind of my bio, the timeliness, importance of the podcast, and kind of the format as well, too. We'll come back next week with a guest. I haven't decided who we're going to kick off with. We have 4 folks that are really awesome. I'm not sure which one I'm going to kick off with first, but stay tuned. You'll learn more about that. But today, I'm going to kick off this first episode with an interview with Abraham Lincoln. You might be thinking, well, how is that even possible? Well, it's not literally an interview with Abraham Lincoln. It's more sharing of insights on how Lincoln lived his life and why and how he became such a great leader. When I think about this podcast and what I want to transfer to you as the listeners, it's to help you, again, become better each and every day, to learn to face obstacles, to learn to be successful in light of obstacles, to be inspired, to optimize the success of your business or your respective job. And that's why I wanted to kick off this episode with this quote I'm going to mention about Abraham Lincoln, and talk about Abraham Lincoln's viewpoint of leadership and overcoming obstacles, or facing or learning from adversity. The quote I'm going to state is from a book called Lincoln on Leadership. If you've not read this book, I'd highly, highly recommend it. I can't remember who the author is. I read a while back, but it's an excellent book, again, called Lincoln on Leadership. The quote that struck me most from that book was stated by a gentleman who was a reporter who was often at odds with Abraham Lincoln during his presidency. His name was Horace Greeley. Upon Lincoln's assassination, Greeley stated this, made this quote about Lincoln. And again, I love this quote because it's what I aspire to, number one. And it's kind of what I aspire to deliver in this podcast for all my listeners. The quote goes like this. It's about Abraham Lincoln from Horace Greeley. He was not born king of men, but a child of the common people, who made himself a great persuader, therefore a leader by dint of firm resolve and dogged perseverance. He was open to all impressions and influences, and this is my favorite part, and gladly profited by the teaching of events and circumstances, no matter how adverse or unwelcome. There was probably no year in his life when he was not a wiser, cooler, and better man than he had been the year preceding. God, I love that quote. And that's what I aspire to, is looking at every day as a chance to, again, grow, transform, and evolve into the person I'm meant to become, both personally and professionally. And again, that's what I'm hoping for in this podcast, is for the listeners, based on the interviews that I'm going to conduct with successful people, to help you grow, transform, and evolve and become better each and every day. And despite the obstacles thrown in your path, you use those obstacles as leverage for success down the road, just as Abraham Lincoln did. If anyone knows about the history of Abraham Lincoln, he had a very, very difficult life, many failures in business and in running for political office. I think he had a child that died. He had health issues. He had a very difficult life, but he did not let any of those obstacles deter him or stop him in total. In fact, he leveraged those for success. And that's the whole point of Greeley's quote about Lincoln, that he learned from everything. No situation did not incur learning, whether it was a successful situation or a failure. Everything in our lives, in my opinion, and I believe in what Greeley's trying to say about Lincoln, everything in our lives is placed there for a reason. Again, to help us grow, transform, and evolve. And that's the purpose that's the title of this podcast as well, too. And that's why I know my most difficult times have been when I've been willing to learn a lesson, have been my best times. I've learned the most. I've grown the most as a human being when I've successfully faced an obstacle. I say successfully faced it because many times I wouldn't, or we don't face our obstacles or difficulties or adversity directly. So assertively face them, hopefully overcome them, but at least learn a valuable lesson. And I'm going to talk about that next, why it's so important to use the adversity or the uncertainty or the uncomfortableness of our lives, ambiguity, how to use that to our advantage when it does happen, because it will bode well for us if we learn a lesson, if we've overcome it. It's going to bode well for us down the road, and again, help us grow, transform, and evolve. Once again, the reason for the title of this podcast. So I want to talk about 5 takeaways built off of the quote about Abraham Lincoln on our ability to successfully face obstacles, grow from them, and learn and overcome them, and how that might tie to leadership as well too. I'm going to cover 5 pieces of information. I would say when adversity strikes, the number one thing you want to do is accept and acknowledge that adversity is indeed a part of life. That's important because accepting that adversity is a part of life is going to do a lot for our brain, how our brain responds to adversity. If we accept that it's going to happen, that it's a part of life, then we're more willing to deal with it in a positive light. If we get frustrated, if we get angry, that immediately puts us in a negative light. And I'm going to talk later about why that's so important, tying to what I call our brain functionality. So accept and acknowledge, accept that adversity is a part of life, and acknowledge that adversity is an opportunity for us to learn a valuable lesson that will bode well for us down the road. What lesson can I learn from a failure? What lesson can I learn from dealing with a difficult customer, a difficult spouse, or a difficult life situation, a change? Because the lessons I learn are going to bode well for me later. If I avoid it, there's no lesson learned. If I hide from it, there's no lesson learned. If I get angry about it, there's no lesson learned. And I'm going to talk about the importance of our brain and why acceptance and acknowledgement is so important to our ability to face, overcome, and learn from obstacles. So that's number 1, accept and acknowledge that difficulties, obstacles are a part of life. And it's a chance to learn. Secondly, I want to help think about raising your emotional intelligence will also help drive our ability to succeed in the light of obstacles. What's that mean? EQ, emotional intelligence. I'm not sure if everyone knows what EQ is. Let me put a little story here. Just think about IQ, your intelligence quotient, how smart you are. Look at it this way. You can be a brilliant, Harvard-educated, MBA grad, brilliant person, but if you're prone to anger, if you're prone to easily getting frustrated, if you get mad quickly, you're not going to be as effective as you could be, despite how smart you are, in spite of how smart you are. If you irritate people around you, if no one wants to work with you because you're difficult to work with, you're not going to be an effective leader because no one wants to work with you. So you can be, again, the smartest person on earth, but if you don't have those emotional understandings of yourself, how you behave, how you communicate, how you deal with change, risk, conflict, and adversity, how you make decisions, how you're motivated. If you don't understand that about yourself and those people you're engaging with, you're not going to be effective regardless of how smart you are. So I talk about raising your emotional intelligence as a real good way in helping you become better at facing life's difficulties. Emotional intelligence, there's many renditions of it, but I'm going to talk the version I focus on the most. It covers really 3 areas to raise your emotional intelligence. First is build your intrapersonal skills. Again, that's a knowledge about yourself. How well do you know yourself? How well do you know your behavior, your communication style? How you deal with change, risk, and conflict? How are you motivated? How do you make decisions? How do you deal with adversity? So the more you have that knowledge about yourself, the more successful you are at self-managing, so to speak. In addition, if you can read those same behaviors, communication, motivation, behavior, so on and so forth, with others, you're going to be more effective as well too, especially as a leader, because you're going to be able to read when someone's angry or when someone's shutting down or when someone's motivated or not motivated. One of the greatest football coaches ever, Vince Lombardi, was a great leader, communicator. One of the greatest football coaches ever used to say the key to his success was I'm paraphrasing, he knew how to lead and coach 40 different men 40 different ways. Coach, lead, and manage or motivate 40 different men 40 different ways, meaning not all his players were motivated by the same things. Not all his players communicated in the same manner. So it's really important for him to know those hot buttons to push on his players. And that's one of the reasons he was such a great coach. So that raising your emotional intelligence, understanding yourself better, understanding the people you're engaging with better, will help you in turn be more successful in the face of obstacles, in the face of ambiguity and uncertainty like we're going through now. And if we can do those two things, we're also going to be better. The third part is kind of combined. We'll be able to better make wiser decisions, resolve conflict more effectively, and solve problems. So people who have a high emotional intelligence have great intrapersonal skills, self-knowledge, great interpersonal skills. They can engage and get along well with others. And they're very effective at making good decisions, resolving conflict, and solving problems. And think, if you can raise your emotional intelligence and be good in all those things, just think how much more successful you can be in these crazy times we're going through now. And we're going to go through down the road too, because again, we're in that fast-paced, high-tech, ever-evolving world. So that's key. Now, you might be asking, how do you raise your emotional intelligence? That's going to be talked about in some future podcasts that I do with some experts in that topic. But some things you can do immediately, the things I recommend is look at taking some sort of behavioral or personality assessment, whether it's Myers-Briggs, DISC, social styles, strength finders. There's a ton of them out there. I'm actually certified in DISC, Myers-Briggs, and Bar-on EQ. And I use this with almost every client I work with because that self-knowledge is imperative on someone's ability to be an effective leader, a business owner, a leader, a teammate, as well as helping these people effectively be successful during situational dynamics such as change, adversity, uncertainty, conflict. So the more we can raise that emotional intelligence, again, the stronger we're going to be. So we've covered two things so far: accept and acknowledge that adversity is a part of life, very much what Abraham Lincoln did. And then secondly, raise our self-awareness, become more astute in how we and those people around us behave and how they function every day, but especially under adverse situations. I'm going to jump into a little bit more of this in a bit. The third piece is what I call understanding your emotional triggers and responses. Now, I'll get into that a bit. Let's backtrack a little bit. I want to do a little discussion around brain functionality and how our brain functions every day, but especially under stress. There's two important parts of our brain. The first being our limbic system, also known as our emotional brain. The limbic system is what we're born with. It's what we have when we're born. It does not, our limbic system does not grow, transform, or evolve through time or experience. It is what it is. So when we're functioning in the limbic system, when an adverse or uncomfortable situation occurs, our response is going to be emotional: freeze, fight, or flight, or some combination of those three. Personally, I'm a freezer and a fighter, and I'm going to talk about that in a bit. So you can imagine when you're dealing with an uncomfortable situation, a difficult person, falling into freeze, fight, or flight is probably not the best place to be. So that's very important to remember that. So the limbic system was good when we were babies. When we were hungry, we wanted to eat, we cried and our parents fed us. Or when we were cavemen or women, a dinosaur came, we would run up a tree. It was our limbic system in place. The limbic system has its good points, but not when we're trying to solve problems, make wise decisions, think out of the box. So keep that in mind. So the second part of our brain is called the cortex, also known as our rational brain. The cortex does grow, transform, and evolve through time, experiences, our training development, our education system. So that is where our cortex is, where rational and logic lies, where we can make rational decisions. We can reason, see a situation, and draw connections and come to a rational conclusion, or at least have the wherewithal or the open mindset to be willing to learn from that particular situation. So through everything, because I think without proper training for a given job, we're not building our cortex muscles, so to speak. I hope that makes sense. Because we don't know the skills for handling an objection or developing a business plan. If we don't know those skills when they happen, we may fall into that emotional limbic part of our brain and not be successful, unfortunately. It's just gonna put us in a negative state. So that's why I'm such a big proponent in training and development, because it's a way to build our cortex muscles, so to speak. Think about it, the education system, reading, writing, arithmetic, all ways of building our cortex muscles. And that's why I go back to accepting adversity as a part of life, because when we can accept that and we're willing to learn from it, acknowledge it, that allows us to stay in that cortex part of our brain and realize this is an obstacle I'm facing. I've faced this before. I've dealt with this before, or I've been trained to deal with this before. I can handle it. Or if you've never faced something like this before, you can say to yourself, stay rational, saying, okay, I'm going to be calm, cool, collected. I'm going to solve this. I'm going to make a rational decision. I'm going to gather all my facts and think things through logically. Only when we're thinking things through logically can we come to rational decisions, rational conclusions, make wise decisions, resolve conflict, think out of the box, solve problems. So it's very important to build our cortex muscles. This is one thing. I hope I'm not going to insult any of my listeners, but this is one reason why I am not a big proponent or a big fan of participation trophies. Because I think in many ways you're robbing children's ability to learn what it's like to fail, or what it's like to succeed, and what it took, or what it's like to be rejected. Life's not fair. We've got to understand that failure, rejection, difficulties are a part of life. If we're not preparing people to succeed or to deal with that effectively, we're not going to be successful as human beings. And I think that's the same with that participation trophy. There's lessons to be learned in a loss. It's not the end of the world. Lessons to be learned about not making the team. What can I learn? What avenue can that take me to next? Every situation allows for us to learn a valuable lesson. And that's the importance of functioning in that cortex part of the brain. When we're willing to learn that lesson, we can deal with things rationally. And those lessons learned will bode well for us down the road, because that builds experience. That builds our cortex muscle, and that will become valuable for us down the road. Rational thinking, folks, staying in the cortex is key. To get across to you is this. When an adverse situation or uncomfortable situation strikes, ambiguity, uncertainty, whatever, a difficult person, whatever it is, however it is defined by you, you must ensure that you prevent the transfer of authority from the cortex to the limbic system. Meaning, when an adverse situation strikes, a situation, a person, an event, you must stay in your rational brain. Don't allow yourself to fall into that emotional brain. Because think about this. When you're angry, can you get unangry right away? Typically not, depending on the breadth and the depth of the situation too. When you shut down, can you unshut down right away? No, not necessarily. It may take some time. So in that time where you're angry or shut down, or you're not operating at the optimal brain capacity, you may make an unwise decision. You may not be able to solve a problem. You may not be able to think clearly. You may say something you're going to regret later. So it's an imperative that you don't allow yourself to fall into that limbic emotional part of your brain. That comes into that third piece, what I was talking about earlier, the emotional triggers and responses. By raising your emotional intelligence, becoming more aware of yourself, you will be able to better understand your emotional triggers, those things, situations, events, or people who can put you into that emotional state of freeze, fight, or flight, or some combination. And the trigger is, how does that emotional state manifest in you? Are you a freezer, fighter, flight, or a combination of those? So the more I can understand, what are those triggers, those things, events, people, situations that set me into a negative state, and what's my response to it, freeze, fight, or flight? Because the more you can understand your emotional triggers and your response, the better you're going to be able to self-manage. Personal experience, I can say this has been a game changer for me. When I did research on this for my book, In Defense of Adversity, I forgot to mention earlier, I'm a 2-time published author. My first book was called The Reach Out Approach, and the second one was In Defense of Adversity, Turning Your Toughest Challenges into Your Greatest Success, my pride and joy. During the research of that, I uncovered a lot about this brain functionality information and discovery of the triggers and responses. And it was a game changer for me, because now I'm more aware of those things that can set me into that negative emotional state of freeze, fight, or flight, and how it feels for me. I'm actually a freezer and a fighter. So someone or something may trigger me, and if I'm falling into the limbic state, I'm going to freeze. I'm going to shut down. Then I might fight back. And as you can imagine, that's not a positive place to be. It can be frustrating for me. It can be frustrating for others. So the fact that I'm more aware of those triggers, that things that trigger me, people that trigger me, and how it feels, I'm more able to self-manage, so to speak. So I'm much more astute at managing myself. So once again, taking an assessment such as DISC, Myers-Briggs, EQ, Strength Finders is a good way to help you learn about yourself and do a little more discovery around what your emotional triggers and responses are. We're going to talk a lot about this in future episodes as well, too, because this is a big piece of my book and discussion and my core business. I just wanted to open it up with this podcast today and the Lincoln piece and everything we're going through with this COVID and really the whole background behind the origination of this podcast. So we've discussed Lincoln and his one of his biggest strengths was his willingness to learn from the obstacles he faced that made him one of the greatest leaders we've ever had. So 5 things to help us become better at making good decisions, solving problems under adverse times, using adversity to our advantage. First, again, is acceptance and acknowledgement. Accept that adversity is a part of life. Acknowledge that it's a chance to grow, transform, and evolve. Secondly, is raise your emotional intelligence. Learn about yourself, your behavior, your communication, your decision-making capability. Learn that about others as well, too, and become more effective in solving problems, minimizing conflict, and making wiser decisions. And the third piece is, so far, learn your emotional triggers and responses. The more you can learn about that in yourself and others, the more effective you are going to be, especially as we're going through these crazy times. So the third part or fourth part moving forward is, let's look at how we can immediately now make good decisions on the spur of the moment. And if we don't make such a good decision, or we have a perceived failure, as I've stated, what's a process we can use to help us review that situation, put it in the bank as a learning to be used for future similar type instances? So to help us make good, wise decisions on the spur of the moment, I want to share a little acronym I've learned recently. It was developed, if I'm not mistaken, by the Air Force. It's I'm going to read it now from the definition. It's the OODA loop. It's called hang in there, OODA LOOP, OODA loop. It's an acronym. OODA is the acronym loop. And the OODA loop is a 4-step decision-making approach that focuses on filtering information, putting it into context, and quickly making the most appropriate decisions. The benefits of the OODA loop are threefold. It keeps you in that rational state. I'm going to get in this acronym in a bit. It's adaptable, it's fluid, and it can change as things happen in the spur of the moment. And it becomes stronger with the more you use it, the more you try it, the more you build the OODA loop muscle, so to speak. So the OODA loop is a 4-step process for making wise decisions. And again, it was developed by the Air Force. The 4 steps, the acronym of the OODA loop is as follows. The first O is observe. Always observe a situation rationally. That forces us to stay in that cortex part of the brain. Orient yourself, draw on any past information or new information that you may have at your disposal to handle that situation. So that goes back to my point about using every experience as a learning, because the more learnings you have, the more of a robust resource you'll be able to pull from to orient yourself for future decision making. The third letter here is D, that's decide. So once we've observed the situation rationally, we've oriented ourselves to how potentially we can solve that situation, we now decide what we need to do, then actually act on that, implement that decision. So it's a logical way to deal with a difficult person, a difficult situation, change, adversity, a new client, a difficult client. It's a way of stopping us and helping us get in that rational state of mind so we can make good decisions in a logical, rational manner. So when a difficult person comes, hit that OODA loop immediately. Observe the situation happening now. Orient yourself to how you can handle it. Decide what you're going to do, then actually act. The more you practice this process, the more effective you're going to be. I use this OODA loop with a lot of my clients, especially in customer service type roles. So if they get an irate customer or a problem they need to solve for the customer, they have a chart with the OODA loop in front of them, and they can logically say, okay, let's observe the situation. Let's orient myself. I've dealt with this before, or I learned how to handle this in training, or it's in the manual how to handle this. Now I'm going to decide and act. So it's a great process to make good decisions, spur of the moment, so you're not falling into that limbic system and you're solving problems, you're handling situations, you're dealing with things from a wiser perspective. So that's the OODA loop. The last piece is, what do we do, if we've had a perceived failure? And I like saying perceived failure because I don't think there's any such thing as a failure, so to speak, if we learn a valuable lesson from that particular situation. Remember, any situation can be a learning lesson and bode well for us down the road. We can plug in all our learnings in the orient phase for future decision-making needs where we use the OODA loop. But let's say we have a perceived failure. Something didn't go right, or you had a bad customer engagement, or you said something to an employee that didn't go well. How can you use, or anything in your past life, so to speak, it doesn't have to be something that just happened, anything, an adverse situation that happened and you want to revisit it and learn lessons from it. You can use this process I'm going to talk about now to do that. It's called a situational debrief. A situational debrief is really a 4-step process to help us connect the dots between past successes or failures, so we can revisit them rationally in a positive light and learn a valuable lesson from that situation. So let's say I have a bad workshop I did with a client. That never happens, but I'll throw that out there. But let's say I have a bad customer engagement, let's say. I can go back and revisit that situation in a positive rational state of mind and learn a valuable lesson from it, so I don't make that mistake later. And that learning there, I can plug into the OODA loop for future decision-making as well, too. And all this, too, is raising my emotional intelligence. See how this all is connecting? So the situational debrief, once again, is a way to connect the dots between a perceived event and what lessons can be learned from that, so you can use that situation for future like situations. The situational debrief consists of 4 steps. First, relive or capture the situation in full. Write it down, relive it, think it through, capture the situation again, get yourself in the moment, so to speak. Review the outcomes from that situation, good, bad, or indifferent. And then thirdly, what are the key learnings you can take away from this situation? What did you learn? What lessons were learned? What takeaways did you have, good, bad, or indifferent? And then fourth, identify what you would do differently down the road. So capture the situation, review the outcomes, what are the key takeaways, and what would you do differently down the road? What this does, again, it allows you to rewire your brain, so to speak, between a past situation, good, bad, or indifferent, success or failure, and put it into a positive light so you can learn a lesson from it, use it down the road. I hope it makes sense to everyone. So that's why I was saying earlier, the importance of accepting and acknowledging that every situation allows us to learn valuable lessons, good, bad, or indifferent. Use those to our advantage. Learn a lesson from it. I played, I can't remember how many, 13, 14 years of organized football. Every Monday after our Saturday or Friday game, the team got together and we watched film. We looked at what we did well. We looked at what we didn't do so well, and we tried to draw lessons from that. That's the same for us in life. We have all this education system. How many years that we could get educated through college, master's degrees, but what are the classes on dealing with the difficulties of life? Simple things you're learning today can be great insights for helping you become more successful and be more Lincoln-like, so to speak. Again, I think that's why I wanted to kick this off with the Abraham Lincoln quote, and talk about this whole topic today, because this is the whole crux behind this podcast that I'm leading here. Fast-paced, high-tech, low-touch, ever-evolving world. We need inspiration, skills, motivation, understanding, and learnings to help us, again, not only survive these times, but thrive in them. And that's why I wanted to kick off this first podcast talking about Lincoln and giving you 5 insights to help you become better, making better decisions, resolving conflict, solving problems, thinking creatively, staying calm, cool, collected as we're going through these crazy times now, which are most likely going to extend. I'm not saying the COVID piece, but we're in this fast-paced world, folks. As they say, I hate the phrase, but this is the new normal. What are we doing to become more successful, prepared for this new normal, so to speak? This podcast is a home for that. So just to end today, we talked a lot about a lot of great topics today, but I want to end today. I think the Lincoln quote encapsulated what I wanted to talk about today and the importance of it and the importance of this podcast. But I'm going to end with another quote, an ancient proverb, which encapsulates kind of what we talked about and where we'll go forward from this. It's an ancient proverb that basically says, the gem cannot be perfected without friction, nor can man be perfected without trials. So I'm a firm believer that Mother Nature teaches us everything we need to know in life if we're willing to pay attention. And I think that's another good example, a metaphor, analogy. I don't know what's called. I think a metaphor, analogy, metaphor. But that ugly piece of coal becomes a beautiful diamond through years and years of pressure, friction. And I think that's a great metaphor for us. Through the obstacles we face in life, it's forming us into the people we were meant to become if we allow that to happen. And once again, that's the piece behind this whole podcast of Grow, Transform, and Evolve. It's about taking the learnings from very insightful people, successful people, and helping you learn valuable lessons so you can grow, transform, and evolve into the person you were meant to become, whether it's your personal life, your professional life. Life's about an opportunity to learn, grow, and transform, and evolve. And I want to be a good cog in helping you do that with our guests. We're going to have the wisdom that they're going to share as well too. So stay tuned. We'll have more information about the next upcoming episode. So stay tuned. We'll let you know some pertinent information about how to view this podcast and how to listen to the podcast if you can indeed view it. But again, my name is Steve Gavatorta. At the end of this, there will be plenty of information. You can contact me. Please feel free to contact me at any time. My phone number is 813-777-9414. And my email is steve at Gavatorta.com. It's a mouthful. G-A-V-A. You can see it behind me right here. Gavatorta.com. But feel free to reach out to me anytime. Feel free to Google me. I'm out there on a public domain. Have a lot of great things on the YouTube sites, and you can actually watch this once I get these uploaded. And is one of your points of contact to watch this. But stay tuned. We'll give you more information on the next date next week sometime, and our next guest. We have some really, really good folks, folks. You're going to love them. They're going to give you some insights. It's going to be upbeat and positive. This is a place you want to come to get away from all the craziness going on our world today, because this is your dose of sanity. Again, thanks for attending the first episode of Grow, Transform, and Evolve, where we discuss all things personal and professional development. Have a great day.